Beautiful people, welcome back to another flight debrief. I'm currently sitting in my hotel room in Indianapolis, Indiana. We just landed. Quick flight, relatively speaking, Newark to Indy. It was a 8 a.m. departure. We got out of there a little bit late. Currently snowing in Indianapolis, but the last flight debrief I did from Miami to Bogota. I really appreciate you guys watching. I appreciate you commenting. You gave me a lot of good pointers, and it seemed like overall you really enjoyed it. So, hopefully, we make this a weekly debrief, weekly video. We'll see how much I'm flying. But without further ado, welcome back to another flight debrief. We're going Newark, New Jersey to Indianapolis, Indiana. All right, I'm going to take you guys through a flight that just occurred from Newark to Indianapolis. I was pilot monitoring on this leg. This will be a part of the vlog, so if you want to check out more of those pictures and videos of the airplane, I'm not going to throw them in these debriefs. It's just going to be cut and dry flying information, waypoints, charts, all that good stuff, performance, you name it, I got it. So we're starting off in Newark, New Jersey. Here's an overview of the airport diagram. Like I've mentioned before, we got the old school kind of charts and then these new moving maps, which I absolutely love. We were parked at gate 5 today, got pushed back by our ground control and taxied out via Charlie Charlie to spot 3. ATC then gave us taxi instructions to taxi to runway 22 right at intersection Whiskey, which is all the way down here, via Charlie Charlie, Bravo, Romeo, which actually turns into Romeo, so it's really easy taxi instructions. We were at number 6 for departure, and we departed runway 22 right at intersection Whiskey. Pete, why are you taking off not full length? Well, I actually described this in my vlog as well. Basically, at Newark, since the runway is so long, as you can see here, 11,000 feet long, most airplanes don't need that long for takeoff. So they, instead of kind of making it a lot longer of a route, it's going to delay takeoffs. It's going to make the line a lot longer. They let us depart from Whiskey. Obviously, you can ask for full length. Some airplanes like 777s, A350s that are fully loaded, sometimes once in a while, or I'll see an MD-11 taking off full length, but we had a 777 take off right in front of us, and they even took off from Whiskey. So there's plenty of distance to take off. We were light enough. We were 307,000 pounds for takeoff today, and we were able to depart from intersection Whiskey. Speaking of takeoff, here's our takeoff performance that I brought with us. So it has all the pertinent information up here. Then we have restrictions. So it's really, really cool about the performance data input that we can enter into the ACARS. If there's an MEL, a minimum equipment list, or a CDL that negatively impacts takeoff performance. So an example of that would be like the speed brakes don't work, things like that. The ACARS will take it into account, and then that will change our takeoff number. So it's something that's really sweet that I really find impressive with the ACARS machine. Here's just the weather. The wind at the time of data input was 303 at 11 gusts to 19. It's showing us our max crosswind limitation of 30 knots. The outside temperature, a brutal -2 degrees C. QNH or altimeter 3004, and then this is where we have to make sure it all lines up because I entered the information correctly. KEWR 22 right intersection Whiskey. The runway was dry this morning. Our takeoff weight, like I mentioned before, 307,000 pounds. Stop margin of 3,273 feet. It then calculates all of that and spits out the data for us. We don't even have to actually manually load it. It automatically throws it into our FMS for us. So we got flaps 5 for departure, thrust of 49 degrees, a D-rated takeoff. Number 2, CG, our center of gravity, 20.8, trim 4.7, our V speed. So V1 is our decision speed of 144 knots. For those who don't know how to convert knots, it's 1 knot equals 1.15 miles per hour. So You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe 144 times 1.15, somewhere around 164, we'll call it. So 164 miles an hour is our decision speed. VR rotate was 2 knots later at 146. V2 climb out speed of 150 knots. And then VREF approach, if we have to come back in to land, is 142 knots. Takeoff gross rate 304.3. And our N1 for engine instruments is 92.5 for that D-rated takeoff. And so there's a bunch of information on here. Obviously, I'm not going to go through it all. I'm not teaching you guys how to fly the 767 just yet. There's additional data, takeoff ref speeds, but we're basically checking this over with the FMS. Captain and I are both looking at it, making sure it makes sense and making sure we're okay with it. For our clearance, our departure today was the Newark 5 departure off of runway 22 left. And it's a pretty simple departure. It might not sound like it is, but it is with the FMS and the lateral navigation that the 767 has and most airplanes have. So off of 22 left, climb on heading 219 degrees to 500 feet, then a climbing left turn heading 190. So you basically take off, immediate left turn, 190 degrees. And then when you hit the 2.3 ILSQ DME, then you make a right turn to 220, maintain 2,500. So you take off, runway heading. At 500 feet, you make that left turn for 190. That DME of 2.3 off of the localizer frequency of ILSQ happens pretty quick, and then you're going back right to 220. I am very interested to know, I was actually thinking about this today, why do we do that out of Newark? I would love for someone who knows the airspace or knows the terrain or just knows the procedures, why the heck we have to make that quick little turn. So here's the Newark. So we basically take off, quick little turn to the left, and then a turn right back to the right. Why can't we go straight out? I mean, there's no big obstacles right there. There is a small airport, Linden, but I mean, going 10 degrees to the left and then 10 degrees back to the right, I guess, I mean, that would be my answer. I guess that has to be the reason, because of the little GAs at a Linden. This is crazy how close this airport is to Newark. I mean, we're at 1,200 feet and we're flying right over this sucker. So maybe that's the reason, but if anyone knows, please comment below why we have to do that little turn and then back straight to the south. Doesn't make much sense to me, but either way, that's what we did. And then as we were climbing up to level off at 2,500 per the SID, top altitude 2,500. This happens pretty quick, especially in jets, as you can imagine. We get to 2,500 feet pretty quickly. ATC gave us a right turn and a climb. So as I checked in with departure, they said aircraft turn right 300 degrees, climb maintain 4,000. So we started heading this way. I dialed in 4,000 in the MCP. Captain put the autopilot on right around the 3,000 mark, and then the autopilot leveled us off at 4,000 feet. We radar vectored a little bit left, a little bit right, just for traffic. As you can imagine, New York airspace is one of the, if not the busiest in the entire world because of so many freaking airports. We got Newark, you got Morristown, which is a busy private jet airport. You got Caldwell, a lot of flight training out of here. Shout out Lincoln Park, where I did my flight training. You got Teterboro, which is the biggest corporate airport in the world. That's where all the business jets fly in to get to Manhattan. You got New York itself, which is, have some restricted airspace. You got LaGuardia, you got JFK, so it's chaos to say, organized chaos, I should say. And then we got radar vectors to our first fix on our flight plan to Newell. So ended up giving us direct Newell, climb, maintain 10,000 feet. Speaking of flight plans, here's our flight plan from Newark out to Indianapolis. It was the SID, which we just went over, Newell, and these are the fixes: J60, Dana, Rave, J64, EWC, J64, Main, and then the arrival, the Rhinite transition, Snake Pit 2 for runway 23 left was what we were filed for. So on our way, ATC kept us climbing. I don't even think we leveled off at 10,000 feet. We got clearance to climb up to 17,000, and then we were on our way. Final cruising altitude was scheduled for 38,000 feet, but they ended up loading us with 10,000 pounds more of cargo, so we actually couldn't make it I mean, we could make it up to 38, but it was pretty close to the max altitude, so we ended up just deciding to level off at 36 with 130 knot headwind pushing this way. Our airplane's flying this way. It was a better decision by us to just level off 2,000 feet lower. And then it was a pretty smooth ride all the way getting until Indianapolis, and we were cleared for the arrival. So about halfway through the flight, I changed my chart from Newark over to Indianapolis, go to the star section, and then find our star, which is the Snake Pit 2 RNAV arrival. As you could tell from the flight plan I brought up before, our transition point was Rhinite. So we start from Rhinite, and then we'll go over the fixes together. You got Jeter, Dot Key, Snake Pit, Babney. The altitudes are listed right there. You got Jeter at or below 24, I'm sorry, at or above 240, Dot Key at or below 230, Snake Pit flight level 190 to 14,000, 14,000 feet. The reason I know it's at or above or at or below is based on the line. So if it's above the line, it's at or above. If it's below the line, it's at or below. Snake Pit, since there's two lines, it's between these two altitudes. Babney is between 15 and 11.5, and then this is where it doesn't get tricky, but since we were landing 2-3 left, C insert for transition. So 1 is right there. I come up to the insert of 1. There's a transition. You're doing C chuck, then you're doing FEMGO between 9,000 and 8,000, and then our last point on the arrival is Larry at 210 knots, 5,000 feet. We briefed this arrival. We also briefed the approach, but what ended up happening, which I'll pull up here in a second, as we were approaching Snake Pit, air traffic control said, upon reaching Larry, which is the last fix on the arrival, you are clear to intercept localizer for runway 23 left. The reason that's significant, because that's the approach we were planning on flying, and as you can see here, the fixes going backwards, you got the runway, you got Pacer, you got Big Bird, and then you got Larry. So Larry is the first fix, as the initial approach fix on the arrival for 23 left. It is also the last point on the arrival for the Snake Pit. So they connect, which is really nice. Always makes it just so much easier when the approach and the arrivals connect like that. So we just kept the straight line going, Larry to B Bird to Pacer. And as we were approaching Larry, the captain armed the approach mode because by the time we got to Larry, the ATC also cleared us for the ILS to 23 left because we were still in the clouds. It was like overcast at about 2,300. So hit Larry and then armed the approach mode. We were about 4,000 feet by the time we ended up going to Larry because he descended us to 4,000. So we ended up intercepting the glide slope, even though we had the localizer out here. We didn't get the glide slope until we were at Big Bird, and then it was a nice, smooth 3-degree glide slope down to the runway. You can tell it's a 3-degree glide slope based on this information right here. Speaking of the approach parade, I'll go ahead and just kind of go through a brief that we do. It's pretty common, I would say, for every airline that I've ever flown for, corporate operation I've flown for. Jeppesen does a really nice job pretty much laying it out. We pretty much brief all the big, bold items. So I'll just go through a briefing. So this is how I'd say it. ILS runway 23 left at Indianapolis, Indiana. Chart number is 11-4. Date is 19 January 24. This is when it became active, so you want to make sure it's the right date. We don't talk about any of these frequencies. It's just not important because we're not going to memorize them anyway. We do talk about this briefing strip though. So I'll say localizer frequency IFVJ 111.15. The final approach course is 230 degrees. So to tell you what this stuff means is this is the identifier for the frequency. So for the ILS frequency, so we want to make sure that this pops up on our aircraft prior to shooting the approach to make sure it's locked into the right one. This actual number, the airplane in the FMS auto-tunes it, but it locks up with the localizer for that runway. Because as you can see, 23 right, for example, has a different lettering and different numbers. So it's 111.75 IUZK. We want to make sure that our airplane is going to the right runway. So we double check that with the lettering and the numbers. Final approach course is 230. That's just the course of the localizer. So 99% of the time, the course is going to align with the runway. So runway 23 left is at 230 degrees. How convenient, our final approach course for 23 left ILS and localizer is also at 230 degrees. Pacer is the final approach fix. There's two ways to identify that. You got the Maltese cross right there to identify it as the final approach fix, and it also is going to be right up here. So Pacer at 2600 is the final approach fix. Why do I need to know where that is? It's there's a few reasons, but when you're flying an ILS, mostly it's, hey, this is the point where you're going to want to be almost fully configured, meaning flaps and gear, and slowing the airplane down to its final approach speed. Our ILS DA, decision altitude, the lowest altitude we're allowed to go down to unless we see the runway environment, is 990 feet. It's listed there, and it's also listed right here. So 990 feet is what we would be at in the air. It just correlates to 200 feet above the ground, because Indianapolis is about 790 feet above sea level. So that's why those two numbers exist there. Airport elevation, I wouldn't brief this, but it's there, 790 feet. There it is, touchdown zone 790. MSA, we would definitely brief. It's our minimum safe altitude. It happens to come off the Brickyard VHP VOR. So basically what this means is the minimum safe altitude where you will not hit a single thing is 3,100 feet. You'll have clearance above obstacles 30 miles from the VOR. So here's the VOR, 30 mile circumference. You can draw a ring. You won't hit anything if you're at 3,100 feet. You won't hit anything if you're at 2,900 feet either, but it gives you, I believe it's either 500 or 1,000 foot clearance. I think it's 500, but it might be 1,000. I'm not really sure. Even though I'm a CFII, I'm clearly not up on my FARs and my aims and all that good stuff. But anyway, I digress. This is just the picture version of what we just talked about. Here's a different layout of everything we just talked about it as well. Larry, 5,000, B-Bird, 4,000, Pacer, final approach fix, and then down we go to the runway. As far as airliners go, we're not using any of this because we're not worried about, ground speed and misapproach timing approaches and stuff like that. Nothing that we really have to talk about. But if you're in instrument training, you guys know this better than I do as far as hacking your clock at the final approach fix, when you should reach the missed approach point if you're flying the localizer only and all that good stuff. Lighting system right down here, I'll brief that. It's the Mauser, the PAPI on the left side. Precision approach something or whatever. I forget what PAPI stands for, but basically these are the lights that lead the airplane onto the runway. From, like, you can see them right here, the blue and the orange. We call them like rabbits. It helps airplanes pick up the runway and the course, especially in reduced low visibility. And then a PAPI basically helps you with up or down. It has 4 lights. They change colors, red and white, to tell you if you're high or if you're low. Pretty cool system that some genius invented. So missed approach is right back up here. I'd brief this. What a missed approach is if the airplane can't land for any reason, whether it's traffic on the ground, they're unstable, meaning like they're too fast or too slow, or anything where it's not going to be a safe idea to land the airplane, the pilots will execute a go-around, otherwise known as a missed approach. And ATC and the pilots want to be on the same page. So the FAA and all these Jeppesen airlines, they got together, they said, hey, let's make sure we're all on the same page, let's fly the same thing. So here's our missed approach procedure. It's climb to 1,500 feet, then a climbing left turn to 3,000 feet on a heading of 100. And then outbound on the Brickyard, VHP VOR radial 163 to Osmo intersection and hold. So basically you follow the procedure. It's right down here. You forget, you climb to 1,500 feet. Then at 3,000 feet, you make a left turn heading 100. And then you intercept the radial 163 to Osmo, which is right there. Hit that fix, and then you do I guess this would be a parallel entry to enter holding at Osmo. So I know it's kind of confusing. Instrument rated pilots will understand that a little bit better, but 99% of the time we never use the missed approach. And if that 0.1% of the time we do use a missed approach, we end up not even flying these instructions. ATC just gives us a heading and vectors and back around to fly it. But in case we lose our radios, in case there's a lot of traffic, in case ATC just needs to fly that procedure. That's what we are anticipating. That's what we brief. Captain's leg, like I mentioned, he made a wonderful smooth touchdown right past 1,000 footers on runway 23 left, 10,000 feet long. He had auto brake set to 3. We ended up exiting pretty early, landing distance available. There you go, 5,800 feet. We made a left turn off at Delta 6. We taxied back to Delta. We didn't even have to contact ground. Tower just told us, hey, monitor the ground frequency. Basically just means you don't have to talk to them just in case you need anything, or if they need to get in touch with you, make sure you're listening to that appropriate frequency, which is 121.9 in Indianapolis. Taxi to 2.5, and then we have a ramp control that controls all these gates, because we have more gates than the regular guys over here. We have 100 something. How many is it? Get rid of this. Landing distance, 116 gates. So as you can imagine, when it's a busy morning or night, a lot of airplanes getting pushed back, going left, going right. So we have to get clearance before we cross into our ramp, and they cleared us right into gate 53, and that ended the flight from Newark. And that is the flight debrief, Newark to Indianapolis. I hope you guys liked it as much as you liked the first one. I tried to bring more information into this one. If you guys continue to like these, the performance was definitely mentioned in the last video, so I brought that with me. And like I said, yeah, I briefed the approach plate, because I know I saw a comment on that as well. So I really do read all of them. You guys know, if you follow me, you subscribe to me, you DM me on Instagram, YouTube comment, I read every single one of them. I probably get back to every single one of them as well, especially if you do it within the first day or two of the video being uploaded. But anyway, that's the debrief. I hope you enjoyed it. Please let me know what you want to see more of in the next one. Like I said, we'll try to do this once a week, because I like talking about it. You guys seem to enjoy it, so we'll keep them coming. But gonna go enjoy my Indianapolis layover. We'll see you on the next one.